Hello my dear learner, I once again welcome you to another lesson. In our today's lesson, we will introduce the subject communication, and this part of the syllabus is intended to equip the learner with the basic understanding and knowledge of communication skills. Communication is key to the success of any business organization, and our discussion will revolve around business communication. Communication is a natural human process that involves the exchange of information between parties, the sender and the recipient. Businesses use communication to get their work and the processes moving. And it is important that business people can communicate effectively both in writing and verbally, as well as in using graphic means. We will define communication or seek to understand the meaning of communication. So meaning of communication. Meaning of communication. And we say that communication is a human activity. Communication is a human activity that involves a mutual exchange of messages. Communication can be defined as the process of giving. Definition: the process of giving, receiving, or exchanging information between parties. And the two parties involved in this communication process are the sender and receiver. It is important to note that communication is effected by way of speech, writing, signals or behavior. Now, for communication to take place, certain elements need to be present. And these elements make up the ingredients of the communication process. So we will discuss the elements of communication, elements and communication process. So that we're identifying certain key components in the communication process, which we're defining as the components or ingredients. That make up the communication process. Ingredients that make up the communication process. Communication cannot take place if any of these elements is missing. We also have the communication process, which is the chronological set of steps through which communication is effected. Through which communication is effected. Being a process, it means it is cyclical in nature. It is cyclical in nature. Hence, it ends where it started. That is, communication is a two-way process. Two-way process. I will proceed to identify the elements making up the communication process, as well as the successive set of steps making the communication process. I will take them together because they are related, elements on this side and the process on this side. So that element number one in communication is the sender, while the process is message conception. The sender conceives the message as part of the process. The second element is the message, and on the side of the process, the sender develops the message through a process known as message encoding. So that message encoding makes the second step of the communication process. The third element is the medium stroke channel. This is the means through which communication is effected. And as part of the process, the step is selection of medium. The fourth element of communication is receiver. And what the receiver does, they interpret the message through a process known as message decoding. And the last element or component is feedback. Once the message or the sender has decoded the message, interpreted it in the way they understand, they will give feedback. Feedback provision. This can be very well represented diagrammatically, so that we have the diagrammatic representation of the communication process. So the communication process is going to be made up of the main elements, the sender, then there is encoding process, sender, sender elements number one, encoding. We have the message itself or medium. We have decoding. We have the recipient. And then the feedback. The process is continuous. So that In here we have the sender, we have decoding, we have medium, talk channel, we have, this is not decoding but encoding, sorry, encoding, decoding is here, and receiver, and then the feedback. Communication also takes place within a context or an environment, so that captured in here are the steps in the communication process as well as the elements of communication. We will briefly go over those elements of communication as well as the elements, so that the communication process is initiated by the sender, and the sender is going to be defined as the initiator of the communication process. This is the party that is in need to transmit or relay a message, and the work of the sender is in conceiving the idea, the concept which they want to communicate. These arrows represent the flow of messages, the message itself. So all through we have message. Message continues to take different forms through the process. Once the sender has initiated a message, they will want to put it together, develop it, so that it assumes a form that makes sense to the other party. So the process of developing the idea or processing the idea into something meaningful, something sensible, is what is known as message encoding. Once the sender has encoded the message, they will decide on the means of conveying that information, so that the medium or channel is the means through which the message is relayed to the recipient. Once a medium has been selected, the message is then transmitted to the receiver. And upon receipt of a message, the recipient analyzes that message, interprets it for its meaning, compares it against experiences or prior experiences that they have had, in order to be able to make meaning or make sense of the message. What exactly the sender of the message intended. The receiver is the party to whom a message is directed, and upon decoding the message, they will relay their feedback, so that depending on how they have understood the message, they will get back to the source of the message, who is the sender, and it is that way the communication process will be completed. Once feedback has been relayed back to the sender will be in a position to know whether the message was delivered in the manner, was delivered and understood in the manner that the sender wanted or not. If it was understood the right way, then the process will have come to an end. However, if it wasn't understood in the manner in which the sender intended, they will reinitiate the process again through the same successive set of steps, and a clarification will be made to the receiver so that they understand the message in the way in which it was intended. Now, what is the essence or importance of communication in business? We will consider the objectives or importance of communication in business. objectives of communication in business. Communication in business. All business activities are transacted through the communication process, so that without communication, nothing is going to happen or take place in an organization. Hence, organizational objectives can never be achieved without the communication process. For an organization to get work done, it needs to issue orders and instructions to the employees. For an organization to do business, it needs to interact with customers. For organizational activities to be effectively coordinated, departments need to communicate with each other. Employees need to communicate with and amongst each other. So it is important to note that communication forms the backbone of all business processes, and it is therefore used to execute the basic functions of management, which include planning, organizing, staffing, directing, as well as controlling. Managers will use communication to motivate workers. Managers will use communication to direct and give orders and instructions to employees. Managers will use communication to build good relationships with the public, on whom the business is dependent on for demand of the company products. It will use communication to comply with the requirements of the law, because all business activities are governed by laws and regulations. Communication, therefore, is going to be used in an organization for internal. Communication is used both for internal and external. For internal and external interactions. External interactions. And some of the uses of communication in business will include, among others, planning is one objective of communication, so that through the communication process, organizations are able to establish goals and objectives, and devise the means, better known as plans, of achieving them. Organizational members must come together, determine what it is that they want to achieve as an organization, and the means or ways that they will use to achieve those goals and objectives. Again, communication is going to be used for providing information. This is the basic objective of communication: providing information. That is sharing general information are related to business processes. Again, communication is used to motivate employees. Motivation. A manager or a supervisor interacts with the employees, share and dialogue together, and by so doing, the manager is able to understand the needs, desires, and wants of employees, which facilitates the development of appropriate incentives to encourage employees to be more productive. So, are used by managers to interact and understand the needs of employees which facilitates the development of incentives to impel employees to greater performance, Without communication, there will be no other way of a manager knowing what exactly are the desires and needs of his or her employees. Again, communication is used for coordination, so that by working together, by holding meetings between departments, within departments, there can be congruence of activities is going to be achieved. So it is used to align or synchronize organizational activities to ensure unity and harmony. Again, an objective of communication is providing feedback. Communication is not going to be complete if feedback is never provided. So every time the management communicates to juniors, issues orders and instructions, explains policies of the organization, rules and procedures, the management would also want a feedback, a response from the subordinates in order to establish the extent to which the policies of the organization as communicated by the bosses are being understood by the subordinates. So, it is used to obtain reaction or responses from employees and other stakeholders, including customers. Once customers use the product, they will provide a feedback on the suitability of the product through the communication process. Communication is also used as a control tool so that management use communication to monitor. Management use communication to monitor the work of subordinates, or the work and behavior of subordinates, behavior of employees, such as by way of supervision, such as through supervision. So that managers must oversee the work of the subordinates. Again, information is also used for interaction purposes. Interaction, meaning that it is the tool used to facilitate the working relationships of employees, departments, and the public. So that for an organization to succeed, it needs to relate well with members of the public, because the public and the business are interdependent systems. They need each other for business to be sustained. Again, communication in organizations is also used as a medium of persuasion, so that it is used to convince others, particularly potential customers on the appropriateness of organization processes, of the business processes, and suitability of products, and many other objectives, So without communication, all these objectives would not be achieved, and it would be very hard for the business to do what it does. Now, even though our discussion revolves around business communication, it is important to note that there are different levels of communication other than the business communication. So that this brings us to the discussion on levels of communication. Levels of communication. A level of communication is defined by the number of parties or persons involved in the communication process, and the objective of their communication. So that at any given time, communication will be taking place for different reasons, for different objectives. So that the lowest level of communication is intrapersonal communication. And intrapersonal communication is communication with the self, communication that takes place within an individual. Communication within an individual. And that is communication with the self. It is normal for a human being to engage themselves in a communication process, so that you will generate questions from within you, and you will analyze the situation and generate suitable solutions to those problems. So this level of communication approximates with the thinking process in which a person consciously sends information to him or herself in order to analyze a problem. It is going to be practiced during times of individual meditation or even in creative thinking exercises, where one seeks to generate ideas as solutions to problems that they may be facing. The second level of communication is transpersonal communication. Transpersonal communication. Please note that we said that a level of communication is defined by the number of parties involved in the communication process, as well as the objective of the communication. So that our first level, only one individual is involved. And we're saying the objective of this kind of communication is to soul search, consciously soul search oneself in search of answers. The transpersonal communication here, two parties are involved, but one of the parties is imaginary, so that only one person is real. And this is communication with the supernatural. So we define transpersonal communication as communication with the supernatural beings. Supernatural being. It is communication with the divine, spirits, and ancestors. When you go to places of worship, you engage someone in an exchange, in a conversation, and you believe that somebody is listening to you and they will get back to you. They will respond for whatever it is that you're praying for or asking for that matter. Even when people go to places to shrines, they engage a particular being, a super being that is not visible, does not have human existence or natural human existence. But that notwithstanding, it is a complete communication with an initiate of the process and somebody listening on that conversation and providing a feedback to the kind of communication. So please note that transpersonal communication occurs within a person's spiritual domain. And the objective of this communication is to realize selfhood, enhance spirituality, and answer questions that are spiritual in nature. The third level of communication is interpersonal. Interpersonal communication. And here, two parties are involved. So this is one-on-one exchange between two individuals or two parties. It is also known as face-to-face communication. Face-to-face communication. So every time two persons are conversing, they are engaged in the interpersonal communication. And this kind of communication is a very intimate form of communication, especially between two close friends. And its objective is to share information, feelings, or even ideas and opinions that are of importance to the two parties involved in the communication process. The fourth level of communication is group communication. Group communication. And of course, from the term group, this tells you that this is communication that takes place within a small, informally organized groups. Informally organized group. So any number beyond 2 becomes a group. But an important requirement here is that the group should be small. And another requirement is that the kind of communication is not structured formally, so that it is an informal discussion. And the purpose of this communication takes place is to exchange information that is of concern to the people involved in the communication process and to share ideas and opinions by group members in order to arrive at a decision. The fifth level of communication is organizational communication. Organizational communication. It is important to note that our discussion on business communication is or relates or is what is described by this level of communication. So that organizational communication is communication that takes place in a formal establishment. A formal establishment. And a formal establishment will include, e.g., a church, a school, a company, a business firm, or any other organization, so that it is characterized by a structured processes, formally structured processes. It is guided by a set of rules and regulations, so that this kind of communication is properly streamlined. And the last level of communication is mass or public communication. Mass or public communication, number 6. Mass or public communication. And this is communication to a large crowd. To a large crowd. Large number of people. And as such, these people are defined by differences in demographics and other attributes, including education level, literacy levels, status in life, gender, age, and other attributes. Basically, the objective of this communication is to appeal to these parties or the audience. For example, when a company advertises for products or advertises its products, those products are targeted at a large crowd of people, sometimes not even specifically known to the firm that is advertising. And those individuals will have different characteristics in terms of their composition, gender-wise, age-wise, lifestyles, status, education level, among other characteristics. So it is communication to the public. You are either persuading the public, you are either seeking for favors from members of the public, or for any other reason for that matter. So these are the levels of communication that there are, and it is important to note that our discussion on communication here will revolve around the kind of communication that takes place in a formal establishment, which is a business organization, which is the level of communication relevant to us. So on this note, this brings us to the end of this lesson. Thank you, and I will see you in our next lesson.
Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to get yourself a copy of our professionally prepared study text and revision partners. Visit our shop along Tom Boyer Street, Pioneer House, 3rd floor, opposite Fire Station.